In 1938, my parents, Karl and Slava Duldig, and I fled from our Austrian homeland and went to Switzerland. This was followed by a journey to Singapore, where my parents established a very successful art school and where my father, Karl, had some amazing commissions. This very happy period, however, came to an abrupt end in September 1940, when the British classified everybody holding Austrian or German papers as enemy aliens, and on short notice we were sent for internment to Australia. Together with about 250 other internees, we left Singapore on the luxury liner Queen Mary, which had been converted into a troop ship. Our second-class cabin was very comfortable and, apart from the fear of encountering a Japanese submarine, we could well have been on a holiday cruise. Our arrival in Sydney was reported in the Sydney Morning Herald on the 28th of September 1940. Luxury internees have disembarked in Sydney on their way to a country internment camp. Our hope for parole in Sydney was dashed when we were taken in a heavily guarded train and in trucks to an internment camp situated in northern Victoria, halfway between Rushworth and Tatura. Everybody was shocked by the primitive living conditions. My parents slept on straw palliaces in a tiny room, one of 12 identical rooms in a galvanized ironclad hut. A camp leader was elected, and 2 days after our arrival, the first of many letters of appeal for release was sent to the Australian Prime Minister Robert Menzies and to the Governor-General. It read in part, "We represent 67 men, 75 women, 24 children under 15 years of age, and 42 bachelors. All of us are Jewish refugees from Nazi oppression from German-occupied territories. Our small children from 6 weeks onwards and our aged people up to 80 years are definitely not able to withstand the hardship of living under such circumstances. In the whole empire, no children, women or old people are interned at all, and to our knowledge, no Jewish refugees are interned in the Commonwealth of Australia." The argument was persuasive, but it was also useless. In spite of their bitter disappointment and frustration, the internees set about making the most of camp life. They shared the chores and drew up rosters. My father's drawings illustrated camp life. He drew on every scrap of paper he could find, including airmail paper, envelopes, and even toilet paper. 2 trained kindergarten teachers set up a kindergarten, and I'm in the front of this photo of a happy group of children. We had plenty of playmates and could wander freely and safely around the camp. But the older children had to leave their parents and went to school in Melbourne. When my friend Ruth Gottlieb turned 6, her father fabricated a pram out of packing cases and had it decorated by another internee. But when the soldiers came to search our hut for clandestine radios or a camera, I was scared and I huddled really close to my mum in bed. My father invented all kinds of jobs to relieve his inevitable boredom. He drew up a landscape plan and garden beds were planted between the huts. And I used to pick the flowers and give them to the officers. More ambitiously, Karl set about building a tennis court and posted a notice in the mess hall. "Founding of the tennis club. Today at 8:15, all ladies and gentlemen who are interested in tennis are invited." I hit my first tennis balls on this primitive court, little knowing that one day I would play at Wimbledon. One of my father's jobs was to chop the wood for the fires, and as he had no other tools, he used an axe to carve this amazing head. He also persuaded the camp commandant to allow him to go outside the barbed wire perimeter fence to carve an over life-size sculpture from the fallen limb of a gum tree. Again, he used only his axe, as there were no other tools. The mother and child figure he'd carved was brought into the camp, and the children used to dance around it singing Ring-a-Ring-a-Roses. This photo of our family was taken by the camp nurse, Sister Burns. A few of Carl's sculptures are out the front of our hut, and you can also see the top of the mother and child figure. But the loss of freedom weighed heavily on my father, and most of his drawings show the barbed wire perimeter fence. It was as if this was the limit of our existence, the world beyond, totally out of reach. With no prospect of release, the depth of my father's depression is most clearly revealed in his self-portraits. The internees organised musical programs to which the garrison was always invited. With my little friend Gerald Zeerfeld, I danced Hands, Knees and Bumps a Daisy in the second review called Laugh and Forget. For a short time, everybody could be happy. The internees also played football and netball, and in June 1941 they organised a football match. My father drew up a poster called Football Sensation, Rheumatism versus Gallstones, and my father was the goalie. Communications with our families in Europe had come to an abrupt end. My father drafted a letter to his cousin, Paul Nebensau, but it was never sent. It read in part, "You will perhaps wonder to receive a letter after such a long time. Of our very large family there is little left. We are spread out in every direction of the wind." On the 23rd of May 1941, my mother wrote a letter in French to her sister Rella. Unfortunately, and to her dismay, the letter was returned a couple of months later after being checked by the censor. My father received a number of letters from friends in Singapore. This one from John Eber asks his advice, and he says, "Should I make it like this?" And whatever this is has been cut out by the censor because they thought it was a code. After the fall of Singapore to the Japanese in February 1942, Australia needed every able-bodied man for the war effort. The 8th Employment Company was established to be led by Captain Broughton, a veteran of the First World War, and the men from our camp, which included the Dunera internees, were offered the opportunity to enlist. My father joined the army in April 1942. I cried and waved a hanky when he was taken away in a big truck. In his letter from Melbourne, he's drawn himself in uniform, specially for me, so that I could see what he looked like. Before long, my mother and I also went to Melbourne. We had a small room in a boarding house in Park Street, St Kilda, but I missed my camp playmates and the outdoor life. It was best when my dad came home on leave from the army. Carl's urge to create art was unstoppable. In the army, instead of handing in the potatoes he was peeling to the kitchen, he carved these 3 figures, and in this one you can clearly see the eye of the potato at the back of the head. In a tent in Royal Park, Carl modelled a head of Captain Broughton, the caring and popular commanding officer of the 8th Employment Company. When Carl was discharged in September 1942, Captain Broughton wrote a reference. He concluded, "I wish him every success in the future, and I feel certain that such a talented and creative artist as Private Duldig will surely win recognition. I further wish him contentment and happiness." Carl also did a portrait of the padre of the 8th Employment Company, Captain Charles Young. Padre became a great friend of our family and helped us find our first accommodation at 43 Acland Street, St Kilda. He and his wife Biddy invited us for Christmas dinner to meet their family in their house in Box Hill. In 1945, my parents became art teachers, Carl at Mentone Grammar and Slava at Corowa Church of England Girls' Grammar. At the same time, they started a handmade pottery business, which was operated from our St Kilda flat. In October 1945, Carl held his first solo exhibition in Australia at the Kosminski Galleries in Melbourne. Digger, a sandstone head carved in the army, featured on the cover of the catalogue. In 1946, 6 years after our arrival in Australia as enemy aliens, we finally became Australian citizens.